All right, everybody, as it says on the slide here, I'd like you to take about 30 seconds and write down everything that comes to your mind when you hear the word civics. I'll let you know when you can start and when to stop. You can start right now. You have 5 seconds left. Okay, finish that last word. More than likely, one of the first words that you wrote down on your list was the word government. And typically what we associate with civics are government institutions like our Capitol, the structure of government, learning about the election process, and maybe, possibly, some politicians. But what I want us to start thinking about is that civics education should be focused on 3 concepts and not necessarily some isolated facts. We want to start thinking about power, choice, and justice. I'm going to talk about each one of these concepts a little bit and how it's related to civics education. And then I want you and your partners to work on generating a list of some current events that you think are related to these concepts. Okay, so here we go. So with power, civics education should be focused on concerned with who has power in society. So in the past, we had monarchs who were the only people who had power to make choices for their communities and their societies. Other countries around the world and societies have distributed power across different groups of people as a way to figure out who's going to get to make choices. So the first thing that we want to focus on in civic education is who has power to make choices, how is that power distributed? And once we've sort of understand who has power, the second thing is we want to know how they're going about using that power to make these choices. So do they gather together in a room and iron out their differences and come to some consensus that they can agree on? Or are choices made as a result of public protests, demonstrations, speeches, movements, acts for social justice and change? In some places around the world, choices are made by force. You're forced to make certain choices. And in others, it's the almighty dollar that influences how choices are made in society. So the second thing we want to focus on in civics education is choice and how choices are being made in our society. And the reason why we want or that we need to focus on this process and think about how choices are being made is because we want to ensure that everybody's being treated equally or fairly or justly in our society. So typically we envision Lady Justice here trying to balance the scales in a way to ensure that everyone in a community, society, classroom, whatever you want to call it, is treated fairly. And this is important whether it's on a local scale or a more global scale, because we have to think about the ways in which resources are not distributed equally. So what kind of actions can we take to make sure that everybody in the world has access to water, for example? You can go closer to home and think about something that probably we take for granted, the location of grocery stores. And if you look here in San Francisco, for example, if you lived in outer Richmond, you've got to drive to get to the closest grocery store. So what kind of choices, decisions can be made to help relocate some grocery stores to that community so those residents aren't as burdened in their efforts to get fresh fruit and produce? And finally, we also think about how income is distributed across our communities is another reason. So we want to know why are choices made. We want to know who has power to make choices, how are they making choices, why are they making these choices? Are they making them in an effort to achieve some kind of equity or fairness, or maybe maintain some people's privilege and access to power? So the issues that we most often want to think about, talk about in civics education are the following 3. How do as society we decide to allocate or distribute the scarce resources we have, whether that's time, water, money, grocery stores, what have you? How are we going to regulate human behavior so that we can ensure everybody's treated equally and fairly? And then how are we going to preserve what we would consider our own national interest as a community and society? How are we going to make sure that we can continue to thrive? So when we think about civics and the instruction in civics, we want to have our teaching and our learning driven by those concepts of power, choice, and justice. primarily because they're a lot more interesting than just memorizing the 3 branches of government. Okay? All right, so what I'd like you guys to do now as a small group is you're going to have just take another minute or two, and then we're all going to come back together. And your task is to try to come up with a list of at least 3 examples of current events that you think are linked to one of those 3 key concepts in civics. They don't have to be linked to all 3, just one, whether it's power, justice, or choice. You may begin.